The woman's knees buckled beneath her threadbare skirts right there in the middle of Gila City's dusty main street, her body crumpling like a puppet with its strings cut. And Samuel Xavier knew the kind of hunger that put that gray pallor on her skin, because he had seen it in the mountains when winter stretched too long and supplies ran short. He had been loading supplies onto his pack mule outside Henderson's general store when he caught the movement from the corner of his eye. The woman swayed once, twice, her hand reaching out toward nothing as if she might catch herself on air itself. Samuel's powerful legs carried him across the rutted street faster than his mind could form the thought to move. His massive arms caught her before she hit the hard-packed earth, her weight so slight against his chest that alarm bells rang in his head louder than church bells on Sunday morning. "Easy now," he murmured, though she could not hear him in her faint. Her face was pale as milk, lips tinged faintly blue, cheekbones standing out sharp enough to cut paper. Samuel had spent the last 8 years in the Gila Mountains trapping and hunting, living alone except for the company of his horses and the occasional passing trader, and he had learned to read the signs of desperation the way other men read newspapers. This woman was starving, plain and simple, and had been for some time by the looks of it. People gathered around them in that particular way frontier folks had, curious but cautious, willing to watch but slow to help. Samuel paid them no mind as he shifted the woman in his arms and carried her toward the nearest establishment that might offer shelter and sustenance. The Silver Bell restaurant sat 3 buildings down, its painted sign faded but still legible in the harsh Arizona sun of 1878. "Coming through," Samuel announced, shouldering open the door with enough force to make it bang against the inside wall. The few patrons eating their midday meals looked up in surprise. Sarah Chen, the restaurant owner, wiped her hands on her apron and hurried over, her weathered face creasing with concern. "Set her down here," Sarah directed, pulling out a chair at the nearest table. Samuel lowered the unconscious woman as gently as he could, his rough hands surprisingly careful as he supported her head. Up close, he could see she was younger than he had first thought, perhaps 22 or 23, with auburn hair pinned up in a style that had once been neat but had since fallen into disarray. Her dress, though clean, had been mended so many times the original fabric was hard to determine beneath the patches. "When did she last eat, you think?" Sarah asked, already moving toward the kitchen. "More than a day or 2, I would wager," Samuel replied, his deep voice carrying the trace of an accent his Swedish grandmother had given him. "Fetch whatever you have ready, something with substance." The woman stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering. Samuel pulled another chair close and sat down, his large frame making the furniture seem almost childlike in comparison. At 6 feet 4 inches tall, with shoulders broad enough to block out the sun and arms corded with muscle from years of hauling traps and splitting wood and wrestling mountain lions when necessary, Samuel Xavier cut an imposing figure. His brown hair fell past his shoulders, held back from his face with a leather cord, and his beard was thick though neatly trimmed. His hands, calloused and scarred from hard living, rested on his knees as he watched the woman's face for signs of consciousness. Her eyes opened slowly, confusion clouding their brown depths. She looked at Samuel, then at her surroundings, then back at Samuel with growing alarm. "You are safe," he said quickly, keeping his voice low and calm the way he would with a spooked horse. "You fainted in the street. I brought you here to the restaurant." "I did not," she began, then stopped, her hand going to her forehead. "I apologize. I should not have troubled you." "No trouble." Samuel glanced toward the kitchen where Sarah was clattering around. "When did you last have a proper meal?" The woman's face colored slightly, embarrassment mixing with the pallor of hunger. "I do not see how that concerns you, sir." "It concerns me when I watch someone nearly crack their skull open on the ground." Samuel leaned back slightly, trying to make himself less intimidating. "I am Samuel Xavier. Most folks around here call me Sam when they see me, which is not often as I live up in the mountains." The woman hesitated, clearly weighing her options. Whatever she saw in Samuel's face must have reassured her somewhat because she said quietly, "Beatrice Palmer. I arrived in Gila City 3 weeks ago from Missouri." Sarah emerged from the kitchen carrying a steaming plate loaded with beans, cornbread, and thick slices of beef still sizzling from the pan. She set it down in front of Beatrice, then added a glass of water and a cup of coffee. You eat every bit of that, honey. Samuel here will make sure you do." Beatrice stared at the plate as if it were a mirage that might disappear if she reached for it. Samuel could see her throat working as she swallowed hard, pride warred with necessity on her face, and he recognized that battle. He had fought it himself once, long ago, before he learned that accepting help when you needed it was not weakness, but wisdom. "Please," Samuel said, pushing the plate slightly closer to her. "Eat." Still, she hesitated. Samuel realized she might be too proud to accept charity, so he made a show of pulling out his billfold and placing money on the table. "I'm paying for this meal, Miss Palmer, and I have never been one to waste good food. If you do not eat it, Sarah will have to throw it out, and that seems a shame." It was the right thing to say. Beatrice picked up the fork with trembling fingers and took a small bite of the beans. Samuel watched her close her eyes as the food hit her tongue, watched her force herself to chew slowly when he could tell she wanted to devour everything in front of her. He had seen men fresh off the trail do the same thing, knowing that eating too fast after days without food would make them sick. "Sarah, bring another plate for me," Samuel called, "and more cornbread." When Sarah returned with Samuel's meal, he deliberately began eating, hoping his presence would make Beatrice feel less self-conscious. They ate in silence for several minutes, the sounds of the restaurant flowing around them. Gradually, Samuel noticed color beginning to creep back into Beatrice's cheeks, replacing that awful gray pallor. Her hands steadied on the fork. She sat up straighter. Thank you," she said finally, setting down her fork though half the food remained. "I apologize for my earlier rudeness." "You were not rude. You were hungry and frightened." Samuel mopped up bean juice with a piece of cornbread. "What brings you to Arizona territory, Miss Palmer?" Beatrice took a sip of water before answering. "I came to marry a man I met through correspondence, Henry Walsh. He sent me train fare and promised we would wed when I arrived." Samuel felt a prickle of unease. "And did you wed?" "No." Beatrice's voice hardened slightly. "Mr. Walsh took one look at me stepping off the stage and informed me I was not as comely as he had expected from my letters. He said he would not marry a woman who might give him plain children and withdrew his offer." Anger flared hot in Samuel's chest. He had heard of such things happening, men who brought women all the way across the country only to reject them for the most shallow of reasons. "What did you do then?" "I took a room at the boarding house Mrs. Fletcher runs and looked for work. But there's not much call for a woman's labor in Kila City, it seems. I have tried the saloons, though I will not work as anything but a serving girl, and the general store, and even the laundry. But everyone already has help or cannot afford to hire anyone new." Beatrice's hands twisted in her lap. "My room was paid through last week. Since then, I have been sleeping in the old mission church ruins on the edge of town." "And eating?" "When I could." She met his eyes with a dignity that Samuel found himself admiring, despite the desperate circumstances. "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Xavier. I simply need someone to give me a chance to prove it." Samuel studied her for a long moment. An idea was forming in his mind, one that seemed both perfectly logical and completely insane. He lived alone in the mountains, had done so for 8 years since he left his family's farm in Colorado after his parents died. He preferred solitude, preferred the company of animals to people, preferred the honest challenges of survival to the complicated politics of town living. But looking at Beatrice Palmer, with color finally returning to her face, he thought about the approaching winter in the cabin that always felt too empty when the snow piled high, and about the garden that never quite produced what it should because he could not tend it properly, while also running his trap lines. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Palmer," he said slowly, "and I want you to hear me out completely before you answer." Beatrice's expression became guarded. "What sort of proposition?" "An honest one, I assure you." Samuel set down his fork and leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "I live in a cabin about 15 miles northeast of here, up in the foothills. I trap and hunt, trade furs and meat in town every few weeks. It is hard living, but good living. I've been thinking lately that I could use help with the domestic work, the cooking and cleaning and garden tending, things I'm not skilled at. I would offer you employment, room and board, in exchange for keeping house, plus a wage we could negotiate." Beatrice stared at him. "You want me to live in your cabin, alone with you? Mr. Xavier, surely you understand how that would appear." "I do, which is why I am also proposing marriage if you are amenable to it." The words hung in the air between them. Samuel had not quite meant to say it that way, had meant to lead up to it more carefully, but there it was. Beatrice's eyes went wide. "You are proposing marriage to a woman you met 10 minutes ago?" "I'm proposing a practical arrangement between two people who might benefit from it," Samuel corrected. "You need security and a means to support yourself. I need help maintaining my homestead. We are both adults. We are both, as far as I can tell, reasonable people. Why should we not help each other?" "That is possibly the least romantic proposal in the history of proposals," Beatrice said, but Samuel heard something in her voice that was not quite rejection. "I am not a romantic man, Miss Palmer. I am a practical one. Romance is for people with leisure time and full bellies. We could have a good partnership, I think. I would not expect—" Samuel paused, feeling heat creep up his neck. "I would not expect anything from you that you were not willing to give freely. We could marry for practical purposes and let whatever else might develop do so naturally." Beatrice was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. Samuel let her look, let her see whatever she needed to see. Finally she said, "I do not know you at all." "That is true. But you did not know Henry Walsh either, and you were willing to marry him." "Yes, and look how that turned out." But there was a hint of humor in her voice now, wry and dark. Beatrice picked up her fork again and took another bite of food, chewing thoughtfully. "If I agreed to this insane idea, when would we wed?" "Today, if possible. Tomorrow at the latest. I've been in town 3 days already and need to get back to the mountains soon. I have traps to check and winter preparations to finish." "You do not believe in long engagements, I see." "I do not see the point in waiting when we have both already made up our minds." Samuel watched her carefully. "Have we made up our minds, Miss Palmer?" Beatrice set down her fork and looked directly at him. In the better light of the restaurant with food in her belly, Samuel could see she was actually quite pretty, with fine features and intelligent eyes. But more than that, he could see strength in the set of her jaw, determination in the way she held herself despite her circumstances. This was not a woman who gave up easily. If Beatrice. "If I say yes, I want your word that you will treat me with respect," she said, "that you will not raise your hand to me in anger, that you will not force yourself on me, and that if this arrangement does not work for some reason, you will bring me back to town rather than leaving me stranded in the wilderness. You have my word on all accounts." Samuel extended his hand across the table. "Do we have an agreement?" Beatrice looked at his hand, large and scarred and steady. Then she reached out and placed her much smaller hand in his. "We have an agreement, Mr. Xavier." "Samuel," he corrected. "If we are to be married, you should call me Samuel." "Then you must call me Beatrice." She squeezed his hand once before releasing it. "Now, how exactly does one go about getting married in Arizona territory?" As it turned out, getting married in Gila City was a relatively simple affair. The town had a circuit judge who happened to be staying at the hotel for another day, before moving on to his next jurisdiction. Samuel and Beatrice found him in the hotel restaurant finishing his lunch, and after some brief explanation and the exchange of the necessary fees, Judge Morrow agreed to perform the ceremony that afternoon. "You will need witnesses," the judge said, wiping his mouth with his napkin. 2 at minimum." Samuel thought of the few people he knew in town well enough to ask such a favor. "Sarah Chen from the Silver Bell would likely stand for us, and perhaps Tom Henderson from the general store." "I will ask Mrs. Fletcher from the boarding house," Beatrice added. "She was kind to me when I first arrived." They spent the next few hours making preparations. Samuel finished collecting his supplies and packed them onto his mule, while Beatrice went to retrieve her few belongings from wherever she had stashed them. Samuel bought a simple gold band from the jeweler, sized as best he could guess for Beatrice's finger. He also purchased fabric and supplies that he thought Beatrice might need, things he had never bothered to stock for himself, but that a woman would likely consider necessities. When they reconvened at the hotel at 4 o'clock, Beatrice had changed into what was clearly her best dress, a dark blue cotton that had been carefully maintained despite its age. She had redone her hair as well, pinning it up neatly. She looked nervous but composed. "You are sure about this?" Samuel asked her quietly while they waited for Judge Morrow to finish setting up his papers in the hotel parlor. "I am sure that starving slowly in Gila City is not a future I wish to pursue," Beatrice replied, "and I am choosing to trust that you are a man of your word." I am? Then I'm sure. The ceremony itself was brief and businesslike. Judge Morrow read the necessary words while Sarah and Tom and Mrs. Fletcher stood as witnesses. Samuel slipped the ring onto Beatrice's finger, relieved when it fit reasonably well. When the judge pronounced them man and wife, Samuel leaned down and pressed a chaste kiss to Beatrice's cheek, not wanting to presume more. Her skin was soft and she smelled faintly of lavender, which surprised him. "Congratulations," Sarah said warmly, hugging Beatrice. "You write to me if you need anything, you hear? Samuel comes to town regular enough to carry letters." "I will," Beatrice promised. "Thank you for standing with us." They stayed in town that night at the hotel, Samuel insisting on 2 separate rooms despite the raised eyebrows of the clerk. He wanted to give Beatrice time to adjust to everything that had happened, to know that he meant what he said about not forcing anything. When he bid her good night in the hallway outside their respective doors, she gave him a small smile. "Thank you, Samuel," she said, "for everything today." "You are welcome, Beatrice. Sleep well." He lay awake in his own bed for a long time, staring at the ceiling and wondering what exactly he had done. He had woken up that morning a solitary mountain man with no ties to anyone, and he was going to sleep a married man responsible for another person's well-being. The weight of it settled on his chest like a physical thing. But when he remembered the way Beatrice had looked crumpled in the street, the gray pallor of starvation on her face, and then the way color had slowly returned to her cheeks as she ate the food from his plate, Samuel felt the rightness of his decision settle into his bones. Whatever else happened, he had kept another human being from suffering, and that was worth any complications that might arise. They left Gila City at dawn the next morning. Samuel had a horse for himself, a pack mule for supplies, and he had purchased a gentle mare for Beatrice to ride. She proved to be a competent horsewoman, which relieved him. The journey to his cabin would take most of the day, and he had worried she might not be used to riding. The landscape around them was harsh but beautiful in its own way. The Gila Mountains rose in the distance, their slopes covered with juniper and piñon pine. Saguaro cacti stood like sentinels across the desert floor, their arms raised to the brilliant blue sky. The October air was warm during the day, but carried the promise of cooler weather to come. They rode in silence for the first few hours, both lost in their own thoughts. Around midday, Samuel called a halt near a small creek so the horses could drink and they could rest in the shade of some cottonwood trees. "How are you holding up?" Samuel asked as he helped Beatrice down from her mare. Even through the fabric of her dress, he could feel how thin she was, and he made a mental note to make sure she ate well in the coming weeks. "I am managing," Beatrice replied, accepting his help without protest. "The ride is pleasant. This country is so different from Missouri. Everything there is green and close. Here, you can see for miles." "It takes getting used to," Samuel agreed. He pulled out the food he had packed, offering her dried beef and fresh bread purchased that morning. They sat on rocks near the creek bank and ate. "Tell me about Missouri, about your family." Beatrice was quiet for a moment, tearing small pieces from her bread. "There's not much to tell. My parents both died of fever when I was 17. I went to live with my aunt and uncle, but they had 8 children of their own and could barely feed them all. I worked as a seamstress for 4 years, but the woman I worked for died last spring, and her daughter sold the business. I could not find other work in our town. When I saw Mr. Walsh's advertisement seeking a bride, it seemed like an answer to prayer." She laughed bitterly. "Some answer." "His loss is my gain," Samuel said simply. "You seem like a practical, hard-working woman. That is worth more than a pretty face, though you have that as well." Beatrice looked at him in surprise. "You think I am pretty? I have eyes, do I not?" Samuel felt that heat in his neck again. He was not accustomed to talking about such things. Walsh was a fool. They finished their meal and continued on. The terrain grew gradually more rugged as they left the desert floor and began climbing into the foothills. The air cooled and the vegetation changed, more pines and oaks mixing with the juniper. Several times they saw deer bounding away through the brush, and once a coyote watched them pass from a safe distance. As the afternoon stretched toward evening, Samuel guided them up a narrow trail that wound through a stand of ponderosa pines. The trees opened suddenly into a clearing, and there was Samuel's cabin. It was larger than Beatrice had expected, she told him later. The cabin was well built of solid logs with a stone chimney rising from one end and a covered porch across the front. Behind it stood a barn and a chicken coop, and to one side Samuel had cleared space for a garden, though it was mostly spent now with the growing season ending. "This is home," Samuel said, swinging down from his horse. He helped Beatrice dismount and then began unloading the pack mule. "It is not much, but it is solid and warm." "It is wonderful," Beatrice said, and she sounded like she meant it. "You built this yourself?" "Most of it. I had help with the barn raising from some neighboring trappers." Samuel carried the supplies onto the porch. "Come inside. I will show you around and then see to the animals." The interior of the cabin was simple but surprisingly clean for a bachelor's dwelling. One large room served as kitchen, dining area, and living space, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A rough-hewn table with 4 chairs stood near the kitchen area, where shelves held dishes and cooking equipment. At the far end of the room, a curtain could be drawn to separate off a sleeping area where Samuel's large bed frame stood. A ladder led up to a loft space. I sleep down here usually," Samuel explained, setting down his armload. "You can have the bed and I will sleep in the loft, or you can take the loft if you prefer. Whatever makes you most comfortable." Beatrice walked slowly around the space, taking everything in. She ran her hand over the smooth surface of the table, looked at the books stacked on a shelf near the fireplace, examined the cooking equipment. "You keep a neat house," she observed. "I try. My mother taught me that cleanliness matters even in rough living." Samuel moved toward the door. "I need to tend the horses and check on things outside. Make yourself at home. There's a well just behind the house for fresh water." He left her to explore and went about his evening chores. The animals needed to be fed and watered and settled for the night. He checked his chicken coop and found the hens had been productive in his absence. He surveyed his property with satisfaction, noting what needed to be done before winter came in earnest. When he returned to the cabin an hour later, the smell of cooking food greeted him. Beatrice had started a fire in the stove and was preparing something with the supplies he had brought. She had found his apron and tied it on, rolled up her sleeves, and pinned her hair back more securely. She looked almost at home already. "I hope you do not mind," she said when she noticed him watching. "I thought you might be hungry after the long day." "I do not mind at all. That is why you are here, after all." Samuel washed his hands in the basin. "What can I do to help?" They worked together to finish preparing the meal, moving around each other carefully in the space. Samuel found himself very aware of Beatrice's presence, the way she hummed softly while she worked, the efficient movements of her hands. They ate together at the table as the last light faded from the sky outside. "This is good," Samuel said honestly. The simple stew she had made from dried beef and vegetables was far better than anything he usually cooked for himself. "Thank you. I'm a decent cook when I have ingredients to work with." Beatrice paused. "Samuel, I want to thank you again for what you did yesterday, for helping me. I know this arrangement benefits you as well, but I am not foolish enough to think many men would have done what you did." "Most people are better than we give them credit for," Samuel replied. "They just need the opportunity to show it." After dinner, they sat by the fireplace and talked. Samuel told Beatrice about his life in the mountains, about trapping and hunting, about the rhythm of the seasons and the dangers and beauties of the wilderness. Beatrice told him more about her life in Missouri, about the books she loved to read, about her skill with a needle and her hope to someday have a real garden again. As the fire burned low, Samuel showed Beatrice where everything was in the cabin, the supplies and tools and equipment she might need. He set up the loft for himself with blankets and a pillow, insisting she take the proper bed. "Good night, Beatrice," he said from the top of the ladder. "Good night, Samuel," she replied from behind the curtain. In the darkness of the loft, Samuel lay awake, listening to the small sounds of Beatrice settling in below. He thought about how strange it was to have another person in his space after so many years alone. Strange, but not unpleasant. He fell asleep to the sound of the wind in the pines outside and the quiet breathing of his new wife in the room below. The next days fell into a pattern. Samuel woke early and started the fire, trying to be quiet so as not to disturb Beatrice, though she usually woke soon after him anyway. They would have breakfast together, and then Samuel would head out to check his trap lines while Beatrice stayed at the cabin to work on domestic tasks. He would return in the late afternoon, and they would prepare dinner together, then spend the evening talking by the fireplace. Beatrice proved to be everything Samuel had hoped for in a partner. She was indeed an excellent cook, and she kept the cabin cleaner than it had ever been. She mended his clothes with neat, nearly invisible stitches. She organized his supplies and made clever improvements to the way things were stored. She tended the chickens and managed to coax a few late vegetables from the garden. She was quiet but not silent, hard-working but not joyless, independent but willing to ask for help when she needed it. For his part, Samuel found himself wanting to make things easier for her. He repaired the roof over the porch where it had been leaking. He built her a better workspace in the kitchen area with proper counter height. He brought back fresh meat from his hunts and made sure she had everything she needed. He was careful to be respectful, to knock before entering spaces she might consider private, to never presume anything. But as the weeks passed, Samuel became increasingly aware of Beatrice in ways that had nothing to do with their practical arrangement. He noticed the way the firelight turned her hair to burnished copper. He found himself listening for her voice, for her humming while she worked. He caught himself watching her hands as she sewed or kneaded bread, fascinated by their grace and competence. When they accidentally touched while passing something across the table, he felt it like a shock through his whole body. One evening, about a month after their arrival at the cabin, Samuel returned from checking his traps to find Beatrice outside chopping wood. He stopped and watched her for a moment, amused and a little concerned. She had clearly been at it for a while, and a decent pile of split wood stood near the woodshed. But her technique was awkward, and he could see she was tiring. "That is usually my job," he called, approaching. Beatrice straightened, pushing hair back from her face. "I know, but you do so much already. I thought I could at least handle the wood chopping." "You will hurt yourself swinging the axe that way." Samuel came closer. "Here, let me show you." He positioned himself behind her, reaching around to adjust her grip on the axe handle. He was suddenly very aware of her back against his chest, the scent of her hair, the warmth of her body. He swallowed hard and tried to focus on the task at hand. "Spread your hands more like this," he instructed, his voice coming out rougher than he intended, "and let the weight of the axe do the work. You guide it, you do not force it." He helped her swing the axe a few times, feeling the way she learned quickly, her body adapting to the correct form. Then he stepped back, putting distance between them before he did something foolish like turn her around and kiss her properly. "Try it on your own now," he said. Beatrice split several logs, her technique noticeably improved. She turned to him with a bright smile, pleased with herself. "That is much easier." "Thank you." "You're welcome. Though truly, Beatrice, you do not need to chop wood. You do more than enough around here already. I want to help with everything. This is my home now, too." She set down the axe. "Samuel, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you happy? With this arrangement, I mean. With me being here." Samuel looked at her in surprise. "Very happy. Why do you ask?" "Sometimes you seem far away, lost in thought. I wondered if perhaps you were regretting your decision." Beatrice looked down at her hands. "If you were missing your solitude—" "No," Samuel said firmly. "I do not regret it, not for a moment. I was just thinking." "Thinking what?" He hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "I was thinking that I am glad you are here, that this cabin feels more like a home with you in it, that I enjoy your company more than I expected to. I do not regret anything, Beatrice. I only hope you do not regret it either." "I do not." She met his eyes, something warm and uncertain in her gaze. "I am happy here, Samuel. Happier than I have been in a long time. You have been nothing but kind and respectful to me. I appreciate that more than you know." They stood there in the gathering dusk, looking at each other, and Samuel felt something shift between them. The practical arrangement they had made was becoming something else, something deeper. He could see in Beatrice's eyes that she felt it too. "We should go inside," Samuel said finally, though he did not move. "It is getting cold." "Yes," Beatrice agreed, also not moving. Samuel reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and brushed a smudge of dirt from her cheek with his thumb. Her skin was soft and warm. She leaned into the touch just slightly, and Samuel's heart hammered in his chest. "Beatrice," he said, his voice low, "I want to kiss you. May I?" Instead of answering, she stepped closer and raised herself up on her toes, bringing her face nearer to his. Samuel took that as permission. He cupped her face gently in his large, rough hands and lowered his head to kiss her. It started soft and tentative, a question rather than a demand. But when Beatrice made a small sound in the back of her throat and pressed closer to him, something broke loose in Samuel's chest. He deepened the kiss, wrapping his arms around her and pulling her against him. She was so small in his embrace, but she felt perfect there, like she belonged. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Beatrice's cheeks were flushed and her eyes bright. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," Samuel admitted. "I've been hoping you would," Beatrice replied with a shy smile. They went inside together, hands linked, and that night when it came time for bed, Beatrice quietly suggested that perhaps they did not need to sleep separately anymore. Samuel climbed down from the loft for the last time, and they lay together in the big bed holding each other in the darkness. Samuel marveled at how right it felt, how natural, as if they had been doing this for years instead of just beginning. "I think I am falling in love with you," Beatrice whispered into the darkness. "I know I am falling in love with you," Samuel whispered back and held her closer. The weeks that followed were the happiest Samuel could remember. He and Beatrice grew closer every day, their practical partnership transforming into a true marriage in every sense. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. They worked side by side during the day and held each other at night. They learned each other's bodies and each other's hearts with equal tenderness. Samuel taught Beatrice to shoot his rifle, patiently instructing her until she could hit a target with reasonable accuracy. Beatrice taught Samuel to cook properly, showing him techniques and recipes his mother had never had the patience to teach him. They made plans for expanding the garden in the spring, for perhaps getting a milk cow, for improvements to the cabin. Winter came early to the mountains that year. In late November, the first serious snow fell, blanketing everything in white. Samuel had finished his winter preparations just in time, and they settled in for the long, cold months ahead. But what might have been a difficult, isolated time became instead a kind of honeymoon. They were snowed in for days at a time, but neither of them minded. Samuel kept the fire burning and the cabin warm. Beatrice cooked hearty meals and baked bread that filled the space with wonderful smells. They read together from Samuel's small library of books, Beatrice's voice bringing the stories to life. They played cards and checkers, they made love by firelight and slept late tangled together under heavy quilts. One evening in December, as they sat by the fire with Beatrice's head resting on Samuel's shoulder and his arm around her waist, she said, "I never imagined I could be this happy. When Henry Walsh rejected me, I thought my life was over. I thought I would die alone and unmourned in the Arizona desert, and now here I am, warm and fed and married to a man I love desperately. It seems impossible." Samuel turned to kiss the top of her head. "Nothing about this is impossible. It is real. You are real. This is real. Did you ever imagine getting married? Before me, I mean." "Not really. I thought I was too rough for civilized life, too set in my ways. I thought I would grow old alone up here in the mountains." Samuel tightened his arm around her. "I was wrong. I did not know what I was missing until you came into my life." "We saved each other," Beatrice said softly. "You saved me from starving, and I saved you from loneliness. It seems fair." "It seems perfect," Samuel corrected. In January, a warm spell briefly broke the grip of winter. Samuel took advantage of the thaw to make a trip into Gila City for supplies. Beatrice had written a long letter to Sarah Chen at the Silver Bell, and Samuel promised to deliver it personally. "You could come with me," Samuel suggested as he saddled his horse. "I know you must be tired of being cooped up in the cabin." "I am fine," Beatrice assured him. "You can travel faster alone, and I have plenty to keep me busy here, but come back soon." "Always," Samuel promised, kissing her thoroughly before he mounted up. The trip to Gila City took longer than usual due to the snow still covering the trails, but Samuel made good time nonetheless. He delivered Beatrice's letter to Sarah, who was delighted to hear that the marriage was working out so well. "I had my doubts," Sarah admitted as she poured Samuel coffee. "Not about you, Samuel, but about the whole situation. It all happened so fast. But I am glad to hear you two are happy." "Very happy," Samuel confirmed. "Beatrice is everything I could have hoped for and more." He purchased the supplies they needed and added several items that he thought Beatrice would like, including fabric for new dresses and a book of poetry he found at the general store. He was loading everything onto his pack horse when a commotion down the street caught his attention. Henry Walsh, the man who had rejected Beatrice, was arguing loudly with someone outside the saloon. Samuel watched for a moment, then deliberately turned away. Walsh was nothing to him or to Beatrice now, just an unpleasant memory that had inadvertently led to something wonderful. But as Samuel mounted his horse to leave, Walsh caught sight of him. The man's face twisted with recognition. "Xavier!" Walsh called out, stumbling toward him. He was clearly drunk. "That you? Heard you went and married that plain girl I turned away. That true?" Samuel could have ridden off without responding, probably should have, but something in Walsh's sneering tone made anger rise in his chest. He dismounted and turned to face Walsh, his height and build making the other man step back instinctively. "I married Beatrice Palmer," Samuel said, his voice level but cold, "and you were a fool to let her go. She is worth 10 of you." "She was plain as a post," Walsh slurred, "not worth the train fare I paid." Samuel's hands clenched into fists. He was not a violent man by nature, but the urge to teach Walsh some manners was strong. Before he could do anything, though, Sarah Chen appeared at his elbow. "Do not waste your energy on trash like him," she said firmly. "Beatrice has you now, and that is all that matters. Go home to your wife, Samuel." Samuel took a deep breath and nodded. Sarah was right. He swung back into his saddle and looked down at Walsh with contempt. "You threw away the best thing that ever happened to you. I would pity you if you were worth even that much consideration." He rode out of town without looking back, his anger fading as he climbed back up into the mountains toward home. By the time he could see smoke rising from the cabin's chimney in the distance, all he felt was eagerness to see Beatrice again. She met him at the door when she heard his horse, her face lighting up with joy. Samuel dismounted and swept her into his arms, holding her tight. "I missed you," he said into her hair. "I missed you too. Was the trip successful?" "Very. I have supplies and some surprises for you." Samuel reluctantly released her. "But first I ran into Henry Walsh in town." Beatrice's expression shuddered slightly. "Oh? He was drunk and said some unpleasant things. I wanted you to hear it from me before you heard gossip from someone else." Samuel cupped her face in his hands. "He called you plain. He's a fool and a drunkard, and you are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen." Beatrice's eyes softened. "What did you say to him?" "That you were worth 10 of him. That he threw away the best thing that ever happened to him." Samuel kissed her forehead. "I wanted to hit him, but Sarah talked sense into me." "I am glad you did not hit him. He is not worth skinning your knuckles over." Beatrice took Samuel's hand and led him inside. "Come warm up. I made stew for dinner." They fell back into their comfortable routine, and Samuel did not mention Walsh again. The man was not worth dwelling on. Instead, Samuel focused on the life he and Beatrice were building together. As winter slowly released its grip on the mountains and spring began to emerge, Samuel and Beatrice made plans for the growing season. They expanded the garden significantly, and Samuel helped Beatrice build raised beds that would be easier to tend. They planted vegetables and herbs, and Beatrice started seedlings on the windowsills inside the cabin. In April, Beatrice told Samuel she thought she might be pregnant. His reaction was immediate and powerful, a surge of joy and fear all mixed together. He pulled her into his arms and held her so tightly she had to remind him to breathe. "Are you happy about it?" she asked, searching his face. "Happier than I can say," Samuel assured her. "Are you?" "Yes. Nervous, but yes." Beatrice placed her hand on her still flat stomach. "I hope I will be a good mother." "You will be wonderful," Samuel promised, "and I will do everything I can to help." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and summer. Beatrice bloomed with health, her earlier thinness replaced by a roundness that Samuel found beautiful. He was endlessly solicitous, helping with all the heavy work and making sure she did not overexert herself. Beatrice tolerated his hovering with good humor, though she did occasionally have to remind him that she was pregnant, not made of glass. "I can still chop vegetables, Samuel," she would say when he tried to take over tasks she was perfectly capable of handling. "I know, I just want to help. You help by letting me do the things I can do. It makes me feel useful." They made preparations for the baby, transforming one corner of the cabin into a nursery area. Samuel built a beautiful cradle from pine, sanding it smooth and carefully, wanting it to be perfect. Beatrice sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her needle flashing in the lamplight as she worked. In early October, almost exactly 1 year after Samuel had first caught Beatrice fainting in the street, their son was born. The labor was long and difficult, and Samuel had never felt so helpless in his life. He held Beatrice's hand and let her squeeze until his fingers went numb, and he prayed to a God he had not talked to much in recent years. When the baby finally emerged with a lusty cry, Samuel felt tears running down his face. Beatrice held their son and laughed and cried at the same time, and Samuel thought his heart might burst from the fullness of it. "He is perfect," Beatrice whispered, counting fingers and toes with wonder. "Just like his mother," Samuel said, kissing her sweat-dampened forehead. They named him Jacob, after Samuel's father, and he had his mother's brown eyes and a surprising amount of dark hair. Samuel discovered a capacity for tenderness he had not known he possessed as he learned to hold his son, to change him, to soothe him when he cried. He would walk the cabin floor in the middle of the night with Jacob against his shoulder, singing Swedish lullabies his grandmother had taught him years ago. Life with a baby was demanding, but joyful. Samuel adjusted his trapping schedule so he was never gone for long. He wanted to be there for every moment, every small change and development. He watched Jacob learn to smile, to reach for things, to roll over. He and Beatrice would lie in bed with the baby between them, marveling at what they had created together. "I still cannot believe this is my life," Beatrice said one night when Jacob was about 3 months old. The baby was sleeping peacefully in his cradle, and she and Samuel were curled together in their bed. "2 years ago I was alone and afraid in Missouri, and now I have a home and a husband I love and a beautiful son. How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky," Samuel replied. "Or maybe it was not luck. Maybe it was meant to be. Do you believe in fate? I believe that I was meant to be in Gila City that day, that I was meant to catch you when you fell. Everything since then has felt inevitable, like it could not have gone any other way." Samuel kissed her temple. "I believe we were meant to find each other." "I believe that too," Beatrice whispered. The years that followed were full and rich. Jacob grew into a sturdy, curious toddler who loved to follow his father around and help with chores. Samuel taught his son about the mountains, about the animals and plants, about how to move quietly through the forest. Beatrice taught Jacob his letters and numbers, and she sang to him the way her mother had sung to her. When Jacob was 2, Beatrice became pregnant again. Their daughter was born in the spring, and they named her Lily. She had her father's light brown hair and a sunny disposition that charmed everyone who met her. Samuel was just as smitten with his daughter as he had been with his son, though he was perhaps even more protective of her. "You cannot wrap her in cotton wool, Samuel," Beatrice said with amusement as she watched him carefully inspect the cradle for any possible splinters before putting Lily down. "I can try," Samuel replied, but he was smiling. They expanded the cabin as their family grew, adding another room that could serve as a bedroom for the children when they were older. Samuel built sturdy furniture sized for small hands, and Beatrice filled the space with warmth and love. Their home became known in the scattered community of mountain folk as a place of hospitality and kindness. Travelers knew they could stop at the Xavier cabin and find a warm meal and a place to sleep. When Jacob was 5 and Lily 3, Samuel took his family to Gila City for the first time all together. The town had grown in the years since Samuel had first brought Beatrice there, and more families had settled in the area. Sarah Chen was still running the Silver Bell, and she made a tremendous fuss over the children. "Look at you two," she exclaimed, pressing cookies into their hands, "just as beautiful as your mama." They stayed in town for several days, and Beatrice enjoyed the chance to socialize with other women while Samuel conducted his business. On their last evening, as they were preparing to head back to the mountains, they encountered Henry Walsh on the street. Samuel tensed automatically, putting himself slightly between Walsh and his family. But the man who approached them looked nothing like the sneering drunk Samuel remembered. Walsh was thinner, older-looking, with a defeated air about him. "Mrs. Xavier," Walsh said, nodding to Beatrice. "Mr. Xavier, I apologize for disturbing you, but I wanted to say something I should have said years ago." He took a breath. "I'm sorry. I was a fool, and I treated you badly, Miss Palmer, Mrs. Xavier, I mean. You deserved better. I can see you found it." Beatrice looked at Walsh for a long moment. Samuel could feel her hand tighten on his arm, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "Thank you for saying so, Mr. Walsh. I hope you have found some peace." "I am working on it," Walsh said. "You have a beautiful family. I wish you all happiness." He walked away, and Samuel looked down at Beatrice. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine. More than fine." She looked up at him with a smile. "Seeing him just reminded me how far I have come, how lucky I am, how much I love you." "I love you too," Samuel said, and kissed her right there on the main street of Gila City with their children watching and giggling. They returned to their mountain home, and life continued its steady, satisfying rhythm. The seasons turned, the children grew, and Samuel and Beatrice grew older together. When Jacob was 10 and Lily 8, a third child arrived, another son they named Thomas. Samuel joked that they were going to need an even bigger cabin at this rate, but he was secretly pleased. He loved being a father, loved the noise and chaos and laughter that filled their home now. The children thrived in the mountain environment. Jacob showed promise as a tracker and hunter, patient and observant like his father. Lily had her mother's way with growing things and kept a little garden of her own. Thomas, still small, showed signs of having a clever mind and curious nature that delighted both his parents. Samuel taught all his children to be strong but gentle, to respect the land and the creatures that lived on it, to value honesty and hard work. Beatrice taught them to read and write and do mathematics, to be kind and thoughtful, to see the beauty in simple things. Together, they raised children who were confident and capable, secure in the love of their parents. As the years passed, Samuel sometimes thought back to that day in Gila City when he had caught a starving woman before she hit the ground. He thought about the decision he had made in a matter of hours to marry a stranger, and how that decision had shaped everything that came after. He could not imagine his life any other way now, could not imagine waking up without Beatrice beside him, without the sound of his children's voices filling the cabin, without this sense of purpose and contentment that had been missing from his solitary years. One evening, when Thomas was about 3 years old, and the other children were doing their lessons at the table, Samuel and Beatrice sat together on the porch watching the sunset over the mountains. The air was warm with late summer, and fireflies were beginning to emerge in the garden. "Do you ever regret it?" Beatrice asked suddenly. "Giving up your solitude, taking on a family, all the responsibility?" Samuel looked at her in surprise. "Never, not once. Why do you ask?" "I was just thinking about that first day, about how strange it must have been for you, living alone all those years and then suddenly having a wife you did not even know. I wondered if sometimes you missed the simplicity of your old life." "The old life was not simpler," Samuel said. "It was emptier. I did not realize how empty until you filled it up." He took her hand, still smaller than his, but strong and work-worn now. "You gave me everything, Beatrice. A home, children, a purpose beyond just surviving. You gave me love and joy and a reason to care about tomorrow. I could never regret that." "I feel the same way," Beatrice said softly. "You saved my life that day in more ways than just feeding me. You gave me a future when I thought I had none. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable. You made me feel safe and valued and cherished. I thank God every day that I fainted in that street and that you were there to catch me. I will always catch you," Samuel promised, "always." As the years continued to roll by, Samuel and Beatrice watched their children grow into young adults. Jacob became a skilled trapper and hunter like his father, though he also had a talent for working with horses that led him to start a small breeding operation on land adjacent to Samuel's property. He married a sensible young woman named Emma from one of the neighboring homesteads, and soon Samuel and Beatrice were grandparents to a rowdy grandson named Samuel Jr. Lily grew into a beautiful and practical young woman who ended up marrying a school teacher who came to the region from back east. They settled in Gila City, where Lily opened a dress shop that quickly became successful, her sewing skills and eye for design much in demand. She and her husband David had twin girls who visited their grandparents in the mountains every summer. Thomas, the youngest, showed a different inclination entirely. He had his mother's love of learning and his father's quiet determination, and when he was 18, he announced his intention to go to university in California. Samuel and Beatrice gave him their blessing, and the money they had been saving for years, knowing it was important to let their children find their own paths. With the children grown and gone, Samuel and Beatrice found themselves alone together for the first time since the early days of their marriage. The cabin felt larger and quieter, but not in a bad way. They filled their days with the work they loved, tending the expanded property that was now more farm than homestead, welcoming grandchildren for visits, and simply enjoying each other's company. "We have come full circle," Beatrice observed one morning as they worked together in the garden. She was 50 now, her auburn hair threaded with silver, her face lined but still beautiful to Samuel's eyes. "Just the two of us again, like in the beginning. Except we know each other much better now," Samuel replied. He was 52, his hair and beard gone mostly gray, his body still strong, but feeling the years of hard work. "And I love you more now than I did then, which I would not have thought possible." "I love you more too," Beatrice said, leaning into him when he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Every year together has been a gift." They continued to live and work on their mountain homestead, growing old together in the place they had built into a home. They celebrated as Thomas wrote to tell them he had graduated from university and was staying in California to work as an engineer. They attended Jacob and Emma's 10th wedding anniversary party and marveled at how quickly their oldest grandchildren were growing. They helped Lily and David when the twins came down with influenza, taking the girls up to the mountain cabin to recover in the clean air. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Samuel took Beatrice back to Gila City for a special dinner at the Silver Bell. Sarah Chen, now elderly herself but still sharp as a tack, insisted on cooking for them personally. "I remember the day you two got married like it was yesterday," Sarah said, setting down plates of her famous roast chicken. "Most unexpected thing I ever saw, and it turned out to be one of the best marriages I've known. You two proved that sometimes the heart knows what it needs even when the head cannot make sense of it." After dinner, Samuel and Beatrice walked through the town that had grown and changed so much over the years. New buildings lined streets that had once been mostly empty desert. Electric lights were being installed in some of the businesses. The railroad had come through 5 years before, bringing more commerce and more people. "It is so different from when I arrived," Beatrice said, looking around. "I remember being so frightened, standing on that street corner with my one small bag, waiting for Henry Walsh and hoping desperately that he would be kind." "He was not kind, but it led you to me," Samuel replied. "Everything that happened, even the hard parts, brought us to where we are now. I cannot wish any of it different." "Neither can I," Beatrice agreed. She stopped walking and turned to face him. "Samuel Xavier, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. Thank you for feeding me from your plate all those years ago. Thank you for seeing something worth saving when you looked at me. Thank you for 25 years of love and partnership and family. I would marry you again in a heartbeat." "And I would marry you," Samuel said, his voice thick with emotion. He pulled her close and kissed her the way he had when they were young, with passion and tenderness and the absolute certainty that she was his and he was hers, now and always. They stayed in town that night at the hotel, in a much nicer room than the simple accommodations they had occupied on their wedding night. They made love slowly and sweetly, taking their time, knowing each other's bodies as well as they knew their own. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, and Samuel thought about how miraculous it was that this woman had come into his life when he least expected it, when he had not even known he needed her. "What are you thinking about?" Beatrice asked sleepily. "About how I almost did not go to town that day. I had been debating whether to wait another week for supplies. If I had decided differently, I would not have been there when you fainted. Someone else would have caught you, or worse, no one would have. We would never have met." "Fate," Beatrice murmured. "It was meant to be." "It was meant to be," Samuel agreed, and held her close until they both drifted off to sleep. The years continued to pass with gentle inevitability. Samuel and Beatrice grew older, but remained active and engaged with life. They saw their grandchildren grow up and begin to have children of their own. Thomas eventually returned from California with a wife and settled in Arizona, though not in the mountains. He built a successful business and visited his parents regularly, always bringing his children to experience the mountain life their grandfather had lived. On their 30th anniversary, the entire family gathered at the mountain cabin for a celebration. Children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, filled the expanded property with noise and laughter. Samuel stood on his porch watching the chaos with deep satisfaction, while Beatrice organized food and activities with the help of their daughters-in-law. "You did good, old man," Jacob said, coming to stand beside his father. He was 32 now, a strong, capable man who reminded Samuel of himself at that age. Built a good life, raised good children, left a legacy worth having. "Your mother did most of the work," Samuel replied. "I just tried to keep up." "You were a good father, are a good father. We all knew we were loved. That is the best thing you can give a child." That evening, after the children had been put to bed and the adults were sitting around a bonfire outside, Emma asked how Samuel and Beatrice had met. Some of the younger grandchildren had never heard the full story. Beatrice looked at Samuel with a smile. "Should you tell it, or should I?" "You tell it," Samuel said. "You tell it better." So Beatrice told the story of arriving in Gila City as a mail-order bride, of being rejected by Henry Walsh, of growing so desperate and hungry that she fainted in the street. She told how Samuel had caught her and taken her to the restaurant and fed her from his own plate, how he had proposed marriage after knowing her for only a few hours, how they had built this life together from nothing but mutual need and trust that grew into love. The grandchildren listened with wide eyes, clearly finding it the most romantic thing they had ever heard. The adults listened with smiles, many of them knowing parts of the story but not all of it. "And you never regretted it?" one of the teenage granddaughters asked. "Marrying someone you did not know?" "Never," Beatrice said firmly. "Your grandfather saw me at my lowest point and chose to help me. He gave me food and shelter and respect. He gave me time to heal and grow strong. He gave me love freely and patiently. How could I regret that?" "The best decision I ever made," Samuel added, reaching over to take Beatrice's hand. "No question about it." As the fire burned low and people began drifting off to their sleeping spaces, Samuel and Beatrice remained by the fire. Their children and grandchildren were all settled, the sounds of sleep and quiet conversation drifting through the night air. "We did all right, did we not?" Beatrice said, resting her head on Samuel's shoulder. "We did better than all right. We did wonderfully." Samuel kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Beatrice, more than words can say." "I love you too, Samuel. Today, tomorrow, and always." They sat together under the stars, in the place they had built with their own hands, surrounded by the family they had created, and Samuel thought about how strange and wonderful life could be, how a single moment of compassion could change everything, how catching a falling woman could lead to decades of love and happiness and purpose. He had been a lonely mountain man, content with his solitude, until the day he saw a woman faint from hunger and fed her from his plate until color filled her cheeks. That single act of kindness had transformed both their lives completely and given him everything he had never known he wanted. Samuel and Beatrice lived many more years together in their mountain home, growing old with grace and gratitude. They saw their great-grandchildren grow and their legacy expand. When Samuel was 70 and Beatrice 68, they sat together on their porch one autumn evening, watching the sunset over the mountains that had been their home for so long. "It was a good life," Beatrice said softly, her hand warm in his. "The best life," Samuel agreed. "And it is not over yet. We still have time." "All the time we need," Beatrice replied with a smile. They continued to live fully and joyfully, their love as strong at 70 as it had been at 30, as it had been on that first day when everything changed. And when their time finally came many years later, first Samuel, and then, peacefully a few months after, Beatrice, they went knowing they had lived every moment to the fullest, that they had loved deeply and been deeply loved in return, and that the family and home they built together would continue long after they were gone. Their great-grandchildren would tell their children about the mountain man who caught a falling woman and saved her from starvation, who married her after knowing her for a day and loved her for the rest of his life. About the woman who was brave enough to cross the country for a new start, who was rejected but refused to give up, who found love in the most unexpected place and built a legacy of strength and compassion. It became a family legend, the kind of love story that gets passed down through generations, proof that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unlikely beginnings, that kindness and courage can change everything, and that true love, when you find it, is worth whatever it takes to hold on to it. The Xavier family continued to thrive in Arizona, some staying near the mountains and others spreading across the state and beyond, but all of them carrying with them the lessons their ancestors had taught through their example about love, perseverance, compassion, and the importance of seeing the value in others even when the world overlooks them. And in Gila City, which eventually grew into a proper city with paved streets and modern buildings, there remained for many years a small plaque near where Henderson's General Store once stood. It marked the spot where Samuel Xavier had caught Beatrice Palmer as she fainted from hunger, the spot where their story truly began, the spot that proved that a single moment of compassion could echo through generations and change countless lives for the better. Their story became part of the history of the region, told and retold, embellished and simplified, but always carrying at its core the same essential truth that sometimes love comes not with flowers and poetry, but with a plate of food offered freely to someone who needs it, and that the truest romance is built not on grand gestures, but on daily choices to see and value and cherish another person. Samuel and Beatrice Xavier had built something beautiful together from the ashes of rejection and desperation, and their descendants honored their memory by living with the same integrity, compassion, and strength that had characterized their remarkable love story. The mountain cabin, expanded and improved over the years, remained in the family for generations, a testament to what two people could build when they chose to face life together with courage and love. And so the story ended as all the best stories do, not with an ending at all, but with a beginning that continued to ripple outward through time, touching lives and teaching lessons, and proving over and over again that love, when it is true and deep and built on a foundation of mutual respect and care, can indeed last forever and create a legacy that outlives even death itself.